In military history, there are big guns, and then there's the Schwerer Gustav. So today, we're going to dive into the story of a weapon so enormous, it almost feels like something out of science fiction. It's a true marvel of engineering, and it was designed to solve one single, seemingly impossible problem.
So here's the question that was really stumping the German high command back in the 1930s. They were looking at this fortress wall, so thick, so unbelievably strong, that any bomb or shell they had would just, bounce right off. How do you even begin to tackle a problem like that?
And that problem, well, it had a name: the Maginot Line. At the time, this was the absolute cutting edge of defensive engineering. It was a whole chain of interconnected forts designed to be completely, utterly impenetrable. For Germany's war planners, it was just a colossal roadblock made of concrete and steel.
So what do? You go to your best guys, right? They turned to their top weapons manufacturer, Krupp, and gave them a directive that sounded almost impossible: build us a gun that can shatter the strongest fortress ever conceived. The challenge was laid down.
And wow, did Krupp deliver. What their engineers came back with, it wasn't just a gun, it was an absolute monster. Let's just try to wrap our heads around the unbelievable scale of their solution, the Schwerer Gustav.
First up, the weight. We're talking 1,350 tons. To put that in perspective for you, that's like stacking almost 200 full-grown elephants. I mean, this wasn't just heavy artillery. It was in a whole different league.
And its length? Get this, 47.3 meters. You could line up more than 4 city buses, end to end, and this gun would still stretch past them. Just a total behemoth.
And the shells it fired? Each armor-piercing shell weighed 7 tons. 7! That's heavier than a T-Rex. We're talking about a single projectile with an almost unimaginable amount of destructive force.
So you put it all together, and what you get is this: a massive railway gun. It was the heaviest mobile artillery piece ever built, and it still holds the record for the largest caliber rifled weapon to ever see actual combat. This was Germany's big, loud answer to the Maginot Line.
You know, the original design specs, they tell you everything you need to know. The shells had to be able to blast through 7 meters of reinforced concrete. That's about the height of a 2-story building. This thing wasn't built to just, damage a fortress. It was built to completely obliterate it.
Okay, but here's the thing. This is where the story gets really interesting and kind of ironic. The Schwerer Gustav was this brilliant piece of engineering, right? A solution to a huge problem. But by the time the gun was actually ready, well, that problem didn't exist anymore.
So they started building it in 1937. But you know how these massive projects go? Technical problems, delays, it missed its deadline. By the time it was getting close to finished, in mid-1940, the war had completely changed. The German army didn't smash through the Maginot Line. They just went around it. And just like that, the unbreakable fortress was bypassed, and this incredible supergun built to destroy it was, well, it was suddenly out of a job.
And this was not a cheap piece of kit. It cost 7 million Reichsmarks, a fortune back then. And here's a crazy little historical fact for you. The Krupp Company gave the first one to Hitler for free, as a gift. So now you have this unbelievably expensive weapon, and it needs a new reason to exist. And that new mission, it came about a year later, way over on the Eastern Front. The Schwerer Gustav was about to be woken up for its first and, as it turns out, its only major combat role, the absolutely brutal Siege of Sevastopol in Crimea.
But look, you don't just drive a 1,350-ton gun to the front lines. Getting it there was a challenge of epic proportions. I mean, a logistical nightmare. It took thousands of people. You had engineering crews whose only job was laying down special twin railway tracks for it. 2 whole anti-aircraft battalions were assigned just to protect it. The train to carry all the pieces was 25 cars long, a mile long. Just moving the Gustav was a full-blown military operation.
And once it finally got there, the real work started. First, they had to build a special curved piece of track, because that's how you aimed the thing. Then it took 4,000 men, 5 whole weeks, just to put the gun together. And like I said, aiming wasn't as simple as turning a wheel. You had to physically move the entire 1,350-ton machine along that curved track. That's just incredible.
So once it was finally ready to go, it basically had 2 flavors of destruction. You had the 7-ton armor-piercing shell for the really tough targets, the one that could go through those 7 meters of concrete, and then for softer targets or just for causing chaos, it had a slightly lighter high-explosive shell that could travel almost 50 kilometers and leave these massive, massive craters.
I mean, it's hard to even picture it, right? You really have to see one of these shells up close. Look at this one. It's in a museum. It just completely dwarfs the person standing next to it. Now just try to imagine that giant hunk of steel flying through the air for miles and miles.
And you know what? In its one big test, it worked. It worked exactly as advertised. Over a few weeks, it fired 47 rounds and just systematically took apart these heavily fortified Soviet forts. But its most famous shot, its most incredible hit, was destroying an ammunition depot that was hidden 30 meters under the sea. It was protected by 10 meters of concrete, and the Gustav's shell punched right through and blew it up. Unbelievable.
But yeah, Sevastopol. That was the Gustav's one and only real moment in the spotlight. After that, the story of this Titan and its sister gun, Dora, comes to a pretty quick end.
So after that one big success, Gustav gets moved up towards Leningrad, and its sister gun, Dora, heads for Stalingrad. But the war, it was changing. The whole idea of these slow, grinding sieges was kind of over. Now, it was all about fast-moving tanks and planes. And in that kind of war, these giant, immobile guns, they weren't an asset anymore. They were just these huge, expensive, and really vulnerable targets. Yeah, the before and after here is it's really stark. In April of 1945, with Allied forces closing in, the Germans made a decision. They weren't going to let these incredible superweapons fall into enemy hands. So, they destroyed them themselves. A really dramatic end for a weapon that was dramatic from the very beginning.
And what's really crazy is that the Gustav, as insane as it was, wasn't even the end of the line for this kind of thinking. German engineers were already drawing up plans for even wilder weapons. I'm talking about a longer-range version designed to shell London all the way from France. And then there was the Landkreuz P-1500 monster, basically a self-propelled tank version of the Gustav gun. Can you imagine? Of course, both of these they were too much, deemed totally impractical, and thankfully never got off the drawing board.
So, where does that leave us? What do we make of the Schwerer Gustav? On one hand, it was an absolute marvel of engineering, right? It pushed the very limits of what was physically possible. But on the other hand, think about the immense cost, the thousands of men it took to operate, and the fact it was really only used in one battle. Was it also just a monumental waste of time, money, and resources? And that really is the complicated legacy of the biggest gun ever built.